mean, the very first job I ever got was when I was in high school. And for some reason in Covina, where I lived, about 3 miles from my house, was this place called Clokey Productions that made Gumby, the little green clay guy, and Gumby and Pokey, and they also did this religious kid show called Davy and Goliath. And I would, save my quarter a week allowance and would mow lawns and stuff to try to get money to buy materials. And, I'm a little, quart thing of rubber. When I started making masks, it was like $8 or something, and at that time it was a fortune. That was a lot of quarters, and it was a lot of lawns, and it got to where I had progressed where I needed more, to do foam rubber, you needed to buy a scale, which was really expensive, and I said, I need a job, and I looked for the regular kind of kid jobs, the box boy and dishwasher and stuff, and it wasn't successful. And my father, in one of his many jobs that he had before he became an artist, was at one point was a truck driver and was meant to deliver some materials to a building next door to Clokey Productions, went into Clokey's by mistake and knew that it was there. And he said, well, maybe you should try that place. So I went to Clokey's when I was, I believe it was 17, in summer vacation, and with a box full of rubber stuff and some stop motion puppets and some masks and things, and said I'm looking for work, and I started the next day. And then that allowed me to buy foam rubber and a scale and some of those things. And also I met a lot of people there that had similar interests than I did, and it was really a good place to start. I think it was a right place at the right time kind of a thing. I don't think there were a hell of a lot of people in Covina that knew how to make a mold and knew how to sculpt and paint and knew stop motion, for that matter. And the funny thing was, some of the animators, one of the animators there was the mailman who used to deliver mail to that place, and he just came in and they had a little Gumby out in front. I go, well, that's interesting, and he kind of watched what they were doing and ended up becoming a really good animator, So to have this kid that walked in that knew how to make molds and sculpt, and that's kind of what they needed at the time. They were doing, it was right at the end of the Gumby series, and they were doing a new series of Davy and Goliath, and they needed new puppets for Davy, and everything had to be resculpted. And so the first thing I did was sculpt these bodies for Davy and Goliath and make the molds and make the foam rubber and do that kind of stuff. I think they were still counting on 12 seconds of filming a day, and they had a number. It was just like in this kind of plain industrial building, and they had, I think, about a half a dozen guys that were the animators, and they had little 16 millimeter Bolex cameras, and they had those little different sets set up, and the process as far as making the Davy and Goliath kind of character was that I would do a sculpture in plasticine and make a mold. In most of the cases, they were just a hard plaster mold, which is usually 2 or 3 pieces, and inside they would build this ball and socket metal jointed armature, and we would suspend that armature in the mold in the middle of the thing, close the mold up, and inject foam rubber into it, and the foam rubber would encase the armature. And then it's painted and so on. That Davy and any of the human characters had hard epoxy heads, and the mouth movement was done. They were little paper mouths. They did a whole series of, these were done before I got there, a series of drawings of mouths in different positions, and they would just stick these mouths on with a little dulling spray, a little waxy dulling spray they put on, and then they just stick a little paper mouth on for different, they would read the track. The editor would go through with this thing and say, on this frame he's making an ooh sound, and this one he's making an ah sound, and the animators would have this chart, and they would know that they put this mouth on for that and that mouth for that, and that's kind of the basics of it. I did very little on the Gumbies, though. I was more Davy and Goliath. I made a couple of, they had this little process because they actually made Gumby out of clay still and plasticine. And they had this little way they did him where they had like a little stencil of it, because he was kind of wedge shaped. His head was thin and his feet were wide, so he would stand up, And this little wedge that you would pack this clay into and like scrape it off, and then they had a little stencil you would cut out the shape, and another little stencil that you cut out to put the armature in, and then kind of clean it up, Made a couple of those and a couple little prop things for Gumbies, but not a lot of Gumby stuff. Art wasn't at the company at that time. That was during the 60s, and art like started taking LSD and stuff, and kind of decided to run for president. And he had spent all his money on ads in the Free Press, vote for Gumby's father for president. The Valentine's party, I think it was. He was one of the little screwy during those times, and the company was then run by his wife, his ex-wife. Ruth Clokey, I believe was her name. And it didn't last much longer, actually. They did that last series of Dating the Life, and I think this company folded at that point.